Well, now for a trip down memory lane, many investors around the world would rather forget. It was 10 years ago today that the Lehman Brothers Investment Bank filed for bankruptcy. It started a week of extreme instability in global markets, and to some minds, this date in 2018 was the trigger for the global financial crisis. From the safety of a hot economy here and south of the border, let's review Canada's lessons learned and maybe some which they haven't with Craig Alexander. He's chief economist at Deloitte Canada now. He was chief economist of the TD Bank Group back then. Just go back. Let's take me back a little bit, Craig, here. How close to financial ruin was this country and, in fact, the world once the dominoes started falling?
Well, in the wake of the Lehman failure, global financial markets seized up, and the economy went into decline immediately. It was quite remarkable just how fast the weakness in financial markets translated into weakness in the economy. And policymakers had to respond very quickly to the fact that the global financial system had in fact seized up, that banks weren't lending to other banks, and this was creating a crippling effect. Quite frankly, if we had gotten the policy response wrong, I do think we ran material risk of having a repeat of the Great Depression. The good news was that we actually had learned a lot of lessons from that time. We had a Fed chairman and a Bank of Canada governor that were acutely aware of the experiences of the Great Depression and how the central banks had done the wrong thing at that time. And as a result, we actually had very concerted efforts around the globe, central banks cutting interest rates, doing exceptional policies, governments injecting fiscal stimulus. So they couldn't stop the recession and they couldn't stop the pain in financial markets, but they certainly avoided the worst case scenario and set the stage for a recovery to begin a little over a year later.
I remember Stephen Harper saying, hey, it's a great buying opportunity in the stock market. I guess he was right, wasn't he?
Well, the question is, from a market, there's an old market adage, nobody wants to catch a falling knife. In other words, nobody wants to buy as things are plunging. I remember looking at a stock display, looking at the S&P 500, and everything was declining except for Campbell's soup. And I remember thinking, okay, it is actually scary when people are buying canned goods.
Probably chicken noodle to fight off their cold. All right. How are current conditions out there preventing this from happening again? And what might be out there which could trigger it all over again?
Well, that's a big question. A lot of lessons were learned during the financial crisis. So, one of the most important ones was that outside of Canada, banks weren't holding enough capital for adverse economic times. And so one of the things that happened in the wake of the financial crisis was, from a global point of view, there was new regulations that came down to strengthen the balance sheets of banks to ensure that if they were taking risk and the risk went against them, that they would still be viable. So, for example, banks now have things called living wills, and these are designed to be, a playbook on what would happen if you ran into a major financial catastrophe that put you in financial jeopardy. If you were going to fail, what actions would your institution take? A lot of the other lessons from the period dealt with understanding financial linkages. For the most part, from an economics point of view, most economic recessions, basically the relationship is the economy goes into recession, and then that impacts the financial system. Well, one of the things we learned from 2008, 2009 was the relationship can actually work the other way around. If you have a bad enough or a big enough financial calamity, that can then transmit to the real economy and Main Street. And that wasn't fully appreciated before the 2008, 2009 financial crisis. So, there were a lot of lessons learned. At the same time, there's still things that are out there. Like, we're still living with the scars of the financial crisis. For example, today, interest rates are still dramatically lower than they were before 2008. And, the concern is that those low rates for such a long period of time may create their own set of financial imbalances. And I think this is, the government of Canada, I think, appreciates these risks. And this is why we've had a whole series of regulatory actions to cool down Canada's housing market. They are being mindful of some of the lessons from 08-09.
Interesting. All right. Well, we'll keep an eye out. And if you see those conditions, Craig, popping up again for another one of those, please let me know before it happens. We'd appreciate talking to you about it. Thanks for your time.
It was a pleasure. Thanks.